Introducing Dr. Bill Doherty is a challenge. His accomplishments are too many to describe in a short period of time. One possibility is this introduction might last longer than his presentation, but I'll assure you, Bill, I'll avoid that temptation. Bill has authored 15 books, over 150 journal articles and book chapters, and countless numbers of magazine and newspaper publications. He's currently a member of 10 editorial boards for scholarly journals and has been on the boards of an additional 5. He has appeared twice on Oprah, twice on 2020, 3 times on the Today and CBS Morning News Show, and in CBS, ABC, NBC Evening News broadcasts. He was not in those broadcasts because he did something wrong, but because he was worthy of good news. His work has been featured in Redbook, Reader's Digest, Ladies' Home Journal, Better Homes and Gardens, Family Circle, and numerous other magazines and newspapers. Bill is a leader. He is currently director of the Family Therapy Program at the University of Minnesota. He's been president of the National Council on Family Relations, as well as holding numerous leadership positions in the American Association for Marital and Family Therapy, Family Systems and Health, the National Institute of Mental Health, and other organizations. He has won numerous professional awards from these national associations and several teaching awards, which are further described in your program. One academic degree at each level was not sufficient for Bill. Besides his doctoral degree in family studies, he earned 2 master's degrees, one in child development and family relationships, and the other in theology, and he received an honorary doctorate from the University of Guelph in Canada. As a young man, Bill did pastoral field work in Washington, D.C. with African American families. He stated in a published autobiography, "For the first time, I had glimpses inside families other than my own, and I was hooked on their fascinating relationships and dynamics." His decades of work in family therapy, moral responsibility of therapists, family life education, families and health care, responsible fatherhood, and helping attorneys recognize that couples who are in the divorce process might actually want to reconcile if the correct approaches were used. These all show that he's never lost his passion for marriages, families, and children. His more recent Families and Democracy project and community activism involves helping concerned citizens strengthen families. An example of this work is illustrated by a statement he helped draft with a citizens group, quote, "Today, parents see themselves as competitive providers of services to children. While children are overscheduled in a frantic pursuit of experiences and opportunity for personal enrichment and advantage over peers. Family Life First is a group of citizens committed to building a community in which family life has first priority in an overbusy and overscheduled world," end of quote. With all these overwhelming accomplishments, Bill is still down to earth. He's engaging, full of humor, always good for a most interesting conversation, including a willingness to suspend his own ideas to listen to yours. I am honored to introduce him. We are in for a very special treat tonight.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim, for that beautiful introduction. My microphone working? Okay. My heart is already full after 2 days here. Of experiencing the warmth of this community, its local and national and international impact, and gotten to know Mrs. Hinckley a little bit through the video and through her children. So motherhood is on my mind, because particularly watching that video with her children here, and then Jim mentioned Oprah. When I made Oprah, my mother knew I had made it. The rest of all that stuff you read, that was nice. And something my mother said to me, and when I had been on Oprah for the first time, just came back to me during the introduction and influenced by the video of Mrs. Hinckley. my mother said, and this would be a mother speaking, she said, "I could tell that Oprah liked you." Now, my mother could document things. So I said, "How do you know, Mom, that she liked me?" And she said, "Oprah shook your hand longer than anybody else's." So I watched the video, and I with a stopwatch, and she was right. The other thing I want to really note was in the video with Mrs. Hinckley. Remember what she said about those summers? She said about that unstructured time. And one of her daughters said at the meal just before the presentation, something like, "It didn't take much to make Mother happy." So that's a perfect setup to the presentation and conversation I want to have with you on the topic of parenting wisely in a too much of everything world, because I think that we think we need a lot to make us happy. We have my wife who is here with me. We've been married for 37 years. We have two children who are in their 30s. We have 3 grandchildren. And so it's quite an opportunity through seeing my children raise their children to be aware of how much more challenging it is, I believe, to raise children wisely than it even was when we were raising our children in the 70s and 80s. There are so many resources. There are so many opportunities. There's so much to do. There's so much to offer our children that wisdom and balance are difficult. So what I want to do with the presentation, there are going to be some times I'm going to ask you to call out some responses to a question. I'm going to be presenting some information. There'll be an academic part of this. And then there will be an interesting video. Then there'll be some conversation about how we've gotten into the challenges that we are in now. And then before I finish, some ideas about what we can do about them. But first, I'd like to ask, what do you think is too much today in the lives of children? The question then is, what's too much? And let's not just do like too much of evil things, okay? But too much of what could be good on its own, but ratcheted up gets to be too much. So, you with me? You willing to call out some things? Okay. What is an example of too much? Sports. Computers. Technology. TV. Homework. Expectations. What kind of expectations? All of them. They have to be stars, right? They have to be academically proficient. They have to be musically. They have to be everything. Anything else? Junk food. Junk food. What else is too much? Video games. Texting. Just that whole world of technology. High school proms. What, they go to too many here? But the high school proms have ratcheted up, right? For older ones, weddings have ratcheted up, right? Birthday parties. Lessons. So let's just take that one on. So weddings ratchet up. Proms ratchet up. Some of us, I was in my, well, actually, we didn't have a limo at our wedding, did we? But anyway, we might have. But there weren't any limos in Elkhorn, Iowa. But so some people might be in their first limo at their wedding. And now you're in then it moves down to the high school prom. And then it moves down to the sweet 16 birthday. And then there are communities in this country where 7-year-olds get picked up to go to birthday parties in limos. Okay? So it moves down and down and down. Now, there's nothing individually wrong with those things, but if you want to think about, the old, before the computers, you'd have a keyboard where you could dial up, ratchet up all the treble and the bass and all these things. It's like parents now have all of these dimensions of their child's life that they can ratchet up one after the other. And it's very hard to keep their balance. And in the process, children grow up too fast. Is anybody concerned about the moving down in the life cycle of girls' clothing? Okay. So it's, in fact, the mother just today was saying that it's very hard to find decent clothing for her 7-year-old daughter because they're all looking like Britney Spears and adolescents. So it's particularly difficult. And so what I want to do is to begin with a video from the Today Show that is going to be on one of the two topics I want to discuss in more depth tonight. The first one is the scheduling of our children. Notice the timing here. Aren't we exquisite? The screen comes down. We practiced this earlier today. So I want to show you a video to get you thinking and feeling about this, and then I'm going to present some data we have about this particular issue. The context of the video game is something I'll refer to at the end of my talk. I see myself as a cultural organizer with parents to try to call attention to problems that had not yet been named. And so the problem of overscheduled children had not been named yet in 1999-2000 when a group got started. So when we started our publicity, the Today Show producer called and said, we got to do this, because she was feeling enormous pressure to have her kids and everything. So what they did was the NBC cameras asked for a family to volunteer to be followed in their Wednesday afternoon and evening schedule. By the way, if a network producer ever calls you and say, could we follow you around, say no. Okay. And presumably this is a good family. I have no desire to knock them personally, but this is a family that is living in the fast lane of mainstream American culture. So this will be a couple of minutes. You'll hear Katie Couric's voice in the background.
7 a.m. in Pompton Plains, New Jersey. The Rasco family eats breakfast and plans the day's after-school activities.
Here you go.
The kids have a schedule, and we like to keep them happy and busy. And busy they are. 3 o'clock. School's out, and 14-year-old Annie is in band practice. 11-year-old Timmy is doing his homework in the car while waiting until his 6-year-old sister Teresa is finished with school. Then it's home for a snack with Teresa and a friend, and more homework for Tim. 4 o'clock. Anne's now in cheerleading practice while Teresa is in gymnastics. 4:45. Mom, Annie, and Tim have a fast dinner. 5 o'clock. Dad's back from work and grabs dinner. Then he's off with Annie to a voice lesson. Timmy has baseball practice.
They like these things. It's not like we're forcing them to go.
Meanwhile, Teresa arrives home from gymnastics, has her dinner.
Annie and Timmy and Mommy and Daddy ate already, but you're gonna eat. Mommy's gonna have some coffee, okay?
And then she tackles her homework.
Page 7.
6 o'clock. Teresa has a piano lesson. 6:25. Annie returns and goes straight to her piano lesson.
Ready?
6:45. Timmy has religion class.
God is always there for you.
7:45. Annie's doing her homework. Teresa's ready for bed.
Okay, night night. Have a good sleep.
8:30. Timmy's finally home, and the kids' combined 8 after-school activities are over for the day.
We want our kids to be happy. We want them to be well-rounded. They seem well-adjusted, and we think we're doing a pretty good job.
Okay. I'm a therapist, so the first question is feelings. What feelings came up in you as you watched? Just call one out. Pardon me? Stressed? Okay. Tired? Anxious? What was that one? Very familiar. That was a young person talking. Wasn't familiar up here, was it? Okay, but very familiar. Any other feelings? Solitary. Solitary. Felt kind of, what's that? A headache. Okay. Well, that's the next question now. Feelings done. The next question is, what did you see What did you observe that gave you some concern? So could you start?
The mom was speaking for the children.
The mom was saying, well, she was speaking for the children, saying they like these things. We don't know if they do like these things. Okay? In fact, when a New York Times reporter came to begin to cover this story in the year 2000, that was the first big media thing. There was a New York Times reporter who just had a child, and she was concerned about how children were being raised. And I pitched the story to her. She called me about a marriage story, and I said, hey, we're working on this. Then she talked to her editor who had a child in traveling soccer. And then they said, that's how we'll do it. See, when people in the media world experience a problem personally, they're more apt to give you space. So that reporter came to the Twin Cities and was interviewing parents and kids for 2 days. And she was interviewing a father and his teenage son. The father, the head of the youth football program. The son, a young football star. Nobody had ever asked this boy around his father, do you like this? You enjoying this? And he said no. And the father was stunned. And the father joined our movement. So that's an interesting point that we don't know what the kids thought. What else did you see in the video?
They didn't eat dinner together.
They did not eat dinner together. They ate in shifts. How'd you feel with that little girl kind of eating? Yeah, it felt sad, eating by herself with her mother there. What else did you notice and see? There was no whole family time. Now, what's interesting, the research indicates when you do time diary studies, we have families keep detailed records of their time. Children do not have less time with a parent now, at least in two-parent families, than they did 30 or 40 years ago. Even though more mothers are in the workforce, they don't have less time with a parent. They have less family time. In fact, what's happened is there's less time given to housework and that kind of thing, and parents are optimizing time with the child. So if you count as family time, as parent-child time, driving them everywhere, okay, then they had time, right? But what's the downside of not having family time? Yeah, a feeling of belonging and being loved by the whole group. Family meals are where the family is part of where the family culture is created when people are together. What else did you notice in the video? Yes?
There's no way to convey your values in discussions especially with the dad and your dad.
Well, she said two things. There was no way to convey the values. When your time with your children is all logistical time, it's hard to have those conversations. And the dad in particular, we didn't see him at all. Now, in fairness, we got a glimpse of their week, and hopefully there's more. So again, this is not to knock this particular family. But the parents were pleased with a day like this. See, what that suggests is a cultural norm. That's really what I'm after here in the conversation, is that this becomes a cultural norm. And in fact, as one mother said in a suburban county outside Minneapolis, bragging rights in her community is not about how big is your house or how fancy is your car. It's how busy is your family. Oh, you think you're busy. In fact, where I live, I don't know if it's true here, asking somebody, keeping busy, what are you supposed to say in answer to that? Yes. And that's a sign that you're healthy. Like, you doing okay? Yeah. Okay. Keeping busy. So the group of parents I was working with, our little revolutionary cell, we decided to stop using the word busy as a positive. Okay, our little effort there. Anything you noticed about the siblings? Anything you noticed about the siblings? They had no time together. In a world that's organized vertically, parents take kids somewhere, kids go and they have a coach or a teacher work with them, the same age group. What you don't have is this sibling, different child generations together. And you then lack some of the opportunities that come from having to interact with a pesky younger sibling or an older one who you have to convince to let you in. These are very important skills in life, okay? Okay, but when you show up and the adults say this is what you do, you don't ever have to do that. In fact, The child developmentalists are really quite concerned about the decline in unstructured playtime because there's a set of skills, social skills, that occur there that do not occur in structured time. Now, in structured sports time, you do learn more skills, by at least the right way to do certain things, presumably. But when you don't have the unstructured time, what you don't have is what we used to call the olden days going out to play. Now we call it unstructured time, okay? But think about the skill sets involved, the learning involved in going out to play. First of all, you have to find somebody and convince them to play with you. You have to negotiate what you're going to play. If that involves more than 2 children, you have to convince another group of children. And sometimes that means negotiating something other than what you originally were going to do. Okay? Then who teaches you how to play? You teach each other. If you need that pesky little sibling, you have to teach them because you need the kid in the group, right? And then who enforces the rules? The group do. Well, the oldest, that's her family there. A little authoritarian streak there, okay? But yeah, the group has to, as opposed to having an umpire. And then you have to decide when to stop. In fact, if you can't manage to handle conflict about the rules, you have to stop playing. Okay, a mother who had a daughter who was 16 and a champion softball player, one summer day the girl was bored and her mother said, well, why don't you go find some friends and have a pickup game of soccer, or of softball? And the girl said, who would umpire? And the mother realized she had never played her beloved sport without an adult in charge. So what we have there is an example of something that we're beginning to learn about in research. And I want to just summarize some of the things we've learned and also some of the complexities of it. The best sources of data are time diaries. And the University of Michigan had a couple of time diaries over a 25-year period, the late 70s into the late 90s. That's our best source of comparison about children's time. It's not been updated since then. And they were focusing on children ages 3 to 12, national representative sample. And they found that children in that age group had lost 12 hours per week of free time. They play less, and their unstructured time has declined significantly. A doubling of their structured sports time. And increasing specialization, by the way, this is other reports from the American Academy of Pediatrics. An increasing specialization in sports at younger and younger ages. The day of the 3-sport athlete is long gone. And what do you think some of the downsides of specializing in one sport at an early age are? Burnout, injuries, okay? Pediatricians are quite concerned about this, and as I said, the American Academy of Pediatrics has a really good report on this you can look at online. They're now seeing Tommy John elbow surgeries, major recrafting of the elbow in little leaguers. And it was named for an old pitcher who probably should have retired sooner, who threw his elbow out, okay? So you get repetitive injuries and you get burnout. What's interesting is the real sports enthusiasts that I have worked with, and some of the parents I've worked with are very enthusiastic about youth sports. Direct programs, love it, are very concerned about kids losing their joy of the sport because they have played it too long. A basketball coach from the high school in Wayzata, Minnesota, where we launched this national conversation, called me to say, I really support this effort of the parents in this Family Life First project. He said that when he gets these boys at the varsity level, sophomores, they have played too many years already. It used to be, when I was growing up, you couldn't play basketball until you were strong enough to get the ball up 10 feet, right? And that was 5th or 6th grade. Now you move it down. And he said they've been overcoached by their fathers. Too many of them have lost the joy in the sport. They've never played for fun. So he does this radical intervention. Sometimes he just says, here's the ball, go play, have fun. Ask me if you have a question. because they have lost their joy in the sport. So specialization is an interesting thing. Also connected with that, by the way, is this bifurcation, if you will. By the time you're 11, you're either excelling and you move to the traveling teams and the specialized teams, or you're siphoned off to something that's second rate. What the pediatricians and the developmentalists tell us is you cannot predict very well adolescent and adult sports skills based on pre-puberty abilities. So it's not really rational to take a kid who's kind of gimpy and not so good at age 9 or 10 and make sure they don't have advanced opportunities. And then you also burn out some of those other kids. Children's time in religious participation has declined by 40% over a 25 or 30-year period. Family household conversations, that is talking together as a family with no other activity going, you're just talking as a family. That declined from very small to the average family having no time in a week where just talking together was the average activity. Family vacations have declined by about 28% over a period of 30 years. Now, some of that is adult work schedules, for sure. Some of it is the structured activities of children. So here's a story of, and I tell the story, this is of friends who I value and admire, and I say this to show how deeply ingrained a new culture of family life has become, even among really good parents. This was a number of years ago. Their youngest was 15. She played soccer all year round. She was on the varsity team in high school. They both of the parents worked for the same organization, same company, and they planned their schedule, vacations, same 2 weeks, first 2 weeks of August to go to the family cabin. In Minnesota, everybody's a cabin. They always call it the cabin on the lake. So I always think of it as like one big cabin and one big lake. Anyway, so they go on Lake Superior. It's their treasured family tradition. They planned it for the first 2 weeks in August in between the end of summer soccer and the beginning of varsity practice. You got it? On July 28th, her summer team made the state tournament. So as good contemporary parents, what did they do? Canceled their vacation. There's an organization in the Twin Cities called Children First. We say family first. Because that excessive child, and in fact, some would say, well, she wouldn't have a good time if she came on the vacation if she really wanted to be playing soccer. I don't care. That's not the point of family time, is to have a good time. In fact, vacations, there's now getting to be some interesting research on vacations. Vacations are one of the potentially most powerful family times because you're together for long stretches and without a lot of outside distractions, and you have to deal with one another. Our family, my wife and our family, our kids, we used to take driving trips across the country, okay? She's remembering. And with little kids, we had a bifurcated line down the middle of the back seat. His zone and her zone. It was like a demilitarized zone. And a line. And a famous story in our family with our daughter, who is now in her 30s, so we'd love to tell this story on her. Our son had fallen asleep in the back seat, and our daughter said, his hair is over the line. Okay? An abomination to her. Okay? And then the throwing up in the back seat, and going through the Rockies, having, what do we have? The car went kerplunk. And in fact, my son was just remembering how he and I trekked to a stranger's house in the mountains to try to call. There were no cell phones in those. Call for help, and hoping they wouldn't shoot us. But I thought if I bring a little kid along, they may, so they did, hey, remember that as one of the smartest things I ever did as a father, okay? Well, those memories, in fact, the worst times provide the best memories. When you finally get to the shores of North Carolina just before the hurricane, and you get out of Dodge, And so when you give those away to one more tournament, you rob children of their memories. Interesting, another figure here, TV watching has increased over the years, as you might imagine, and of course tube time, video terminal. But TV has become, it hasn't increased dramatically because we've had all these computers, but TV has become a more solitary activity. There's been a decrease in families watching television together. My daughter and I used to have a weekly ritual watching Wonder Years together. She was the same age as Kevin, who was the character in this show. And we had a date every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, and we watched the Wonder Years and we talked about it during the commercials. Okay? TV, if you use it well, can be a source of, but now 2/3 of teenagers have a TV in their bedroom, and 30% of preschoolers. 30% of preschoolers. So what we've done is we've organized the family life so that even when people are home, they're shunted off. And then final figure, again, from some of the national polls, family dinners have declined by about 1/3. They did over that 30-year period, but the rebound may have begun. So some of the polls that are tracking this say we may be on a rebound. I'm going to return to family meals later. So the question is, what's the impact of all of this? And one of the things about scholars studying social problems, at least in family life, is we're usually about 20 years behind the times. TV transformed family life in this country starting in the 1950s. The first studies of the effects of TV on family life didn't start to come out till the 70s. So we're just beginning to get our minds around this. So some of this is poll data on children, and then I'll mention some of the more sophisticated studies. So a national poll of children ages 9 to 13 found that only 1/3 say they spend a lot of time with their parents. When asked why not, they offered two major reasons: parents' work schedules, which we could also talk about here, and their own schedules. A national poll of Canadian parents found that 71% believe that parents, quote, don't allow kids enough time to be kids. A national poll of American U.S. parents found that 41% said that kids' schedules and homework make being a parent harder. Now, direct effects on children are harder to find. So I want to be clear about where the state of the research is. When the National Time Diary studies that track the number of extracurricular activities for kids and how much time they spend in those, find that higher rates of participation are associated with somewhat better adjusted kids. And this is actually part of why we started to ratchet up kids' extracurricular involvements, because in general, kids, particularly teenagers, do better when they're not sitting at home watching MTV, when they're involved in meaningful outside activities. And so the National Time Diaries pick that up, a small but modest association or correlation between time spent in outside activities, particularly for older kids, and their academic adjustment, their social well-being. And some of the complications of this, some kids are underscheduled. Okay, so you have a lot of middle-class parents who are involving the kids in a lot. You have some particularly low-income parents whose kids are home watching MTV. If I had to choose, I would have my kids involved in too many activities, okay? So it's hard when you correlate these things. It's hard to tease all that out. And some kids, of course, have high energy levels. They love what they're doing, and they thrive. The first study that's been done that was directly looking at the scheduling issue, time number of activities, and overload. There's only one study that looked at all of those because these other studies were done for different reasons. And then people go back in and they try to pull out this particular issue. This was done in Montreal, a 4-country study, high school kids from the US, Canada, France, and China. And I have to tell you, it's in French, and I took French a long time ago, but through the power of the internet, I was able, and my old skills, to translate the study and to be able to talk about it. They found that the same thing the other studies found, a small positive association between more activities and better adjustment in kids. But the powerful finding was when they looked at a measure of overload, surcharge, they call it in French, okay? The experience of overload, that had the powerful connection with kids' self-esteem, negative connection, and their overall sense of well-being. And I just before I came here, I emailed the author and said, could you give me some of the breakdowns of some of the items in the survey of overload? And so this is, again, a 4-nation study now. 52% of the adolescents said they agree with this statement: I feel overwhelmed by all I have to do. And 51% agreed with the statement, I often feel in a rush. That indicates that this generation is feeling some things about this that previous generations did. And then the last point I want to make about this section of it is that in an individualistic culture, we're always looking at individual outcomes, how the self-esteem of the individual child or their psychological well-being. And we're not looking at family factors. So Jenna Jacob, who's on your faculty here, and some of her colleagues produced a very interesting study of overwork among adults. And when they factored in family meals, the presence or absence of family meals, they found something quite powerful, particularly for women, that the problem of overload and work-family stress occurred not just as a function of how many hours they worked, but whether they missed their family dinners. Okay? So what I'm hoping is in the next generation of studies, we can go beyond the focus on that individual child, and we can start to look at the cost to family life. So that's what I want to transfer to now. Family meals. When I was just talking to a group of parents the other night, and I asked this question: of all the things that parents do with their children, what do you think the research shows of all those activities? What's the most powerful influence on their academic achievement and their psychological well-being? And it's family dinners. By far. By far. And what's so interesting is that researchers stumbled on this. I think sometimes we researchers, we're interested in cool things. I mean, not cool, but we're interested in serious issues and problems. We're interested in conflict and whether people use communication skills and depression and violence. I mean, all those important. But things like, what, are they eating together? It's kind of boring, okay? Just as an aside, for families that celebrate Christmas, oh my goodness, what a powerful ritual that is, right? And over time, when you marry outside, you marry somebody and you find out they come from foreigners when it comes to Christmas, okay, all that. Well, it's only in the last 10 years people started to even look at it. So what I'm saying is the everyday stuff of family life tends not to get studied that much. So the University of Michigan survey, the Time Diary survey of kids aged 3 to 12, found that mealtime at home is a stronger predictor of academic achievement and psychological adjustment than time spent in any of the following activities. So you ready? It's a more powerful predictor than time spent in school, studying, and keep in mind, they had a measure of academic achievement. Time spent having dinners, more important than how much you study or in school. Time spent in sports, church religious activities, or art activities. For teens, the large federal adolescent health survey, which happened to ask about dinners, found that having regular dinners with parents is a strong predictor, in fact, one of the strongest predictors in this entire big data set with thousands of kids, and measures, scales, questionnaires that people like me spend our careers developing and validating. And they threw in a question about how often you eat at home. And that is a stronger predictor, or at least as strong, of any of those scales we've been developing all these years. So predictor of academic success, psychological adjustment. Kids that have more dinners at home with their parents have lower rates of alcohol abuse, drug use, early sexual behavior, eating disorders, and risk for suicide. Well, for those of you who are researchers, this first generation of studies controlled for family structure, family educational background, family income, and race, ethnicity. But the next generation of studies came along, and some of these are occurring at the University of Minnesota in the epidemiology department, where some researchers, Diane Sustainer-Newmark in particular, have been studying eating disorder problems in adolescents. They have very large samples of, representative samples of adolescents in the Twin Cities metro area. And Diane told me she was not anticipating finding anything about family meals on this. They were looking at measures of depression and self-esteem and so on. But what turned out in their studies, like the other folks found, is that the frequency of family meals, particularly dinners, is a protective factor against eating disorder problems in girls and boys. And then what they did in the next study, they used a measure of overall, what they called overall family climate, which was a measure of how close emotionally the children see their families. And they statistically controlled for that to see if the relationship between the family meals was held on its own as opposed to being an artifact of the fact that you have a close family and a close family happens to eat together and their kids do better. And what they found in that study and others is even when you control for, when you adjust statistically for the overall family connection, how often they have meals does count. And then a bit of new information from a national study that I'm involved in. This is not yet published, so keep it quiet. Okay, just our little secret. But for the first time, evidence about the relationship between family dinners and childhood obesity. And what we have is evidence of a 2.5 times greater rate of overweight problems in children who come from families that have 3 or fewer dinners together per week. Okay? And so that's now, once we you know, this is just a week old, this finding, so we have to look at it every which way. But that's an example of something that's is a public health issue. So what we have reason to believe is that some of the wisdom that most parents have and have had, that it's good to spend time as a family. Hey, you know, you had to invite me here to say this, right? Nobody knew this before. And it's good to eat together. Write this down. Okay? You heard it here. The researchers are showing that this kind of older wisdom is really quite important. And young parents raising children believe it, but it's hard to practice. It's hard to practice. When you lose your family meals, it's hard to get them back. We raise a generation of individualists. One 16-year-old girl interviewed by National Public Radio in a feature on family dinners was asked, do you have family meals? Have you had family dinners? She said, no. Why would we do that? And then she said, why would we all eat together at the same time if we're not all hungry at the same time? You get the logic? The other problem is that when we do the fast food world, everybody, if you take your family to McDonald's, you don't say we're all going to have Big Macs tonight, small fries, and 7-Up. everybody chooses their own from the menu, their own meal, right? And so you translate home, and the individualistic family culture says, I don't choose to have chicken tonight, Mother. I feel like such and such. Okay? And then some of the mothers or fathers will jump. They will jump. Okay? Microwave ovens have been the bane of family dinners. Why? Because it's hard to prepare a whole meal at once in one of those things, right? And so you get the sequential meals in front of the TV. So half of American families with kids have the TV on during dinner every night. Okay? A 6-year-old can take a burrito out of the freezer, program their microwave, and have exactly what he or she wants, which is as the Sprite commercial says, obey your thirst. So what I want to do now is to have some conversation with you about why you think this has happened in the last 30 years. If this was 30 years ago, I would not be giving a talk on this topic. There have always been challenges with families and kids, but this issue of parenting wisely in a too much of everything world is one that is more powerful now than it was 30 years ago. Parents are struggling more. Good parents. I was talking at dinner with some, with folks, here that it's a challenge for our children to not go over the top with birthday parties, to not get their 3-year-olds in 4 activities. Not because they're not good parents, but because this is the zeitgeist. This is where I like to use Mississippi images. This is where if you get into a canoe at the Mississippi River in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I come from, and you don't paddle, you go south. And if you're in a convoy, you feel like it's normal. We're all going south. We're all going south, okay? So my question to you is, what's changed in the broader culture in the last 30 years that you think has brought this problem on? And what I want to, and I'm deliberately asking you to think about it at the broader social, cultural level, not at the psychological level. In other words, I don't think the answer is individually parents are worse parents. Okay? They don't love their kids as much, or individually I think something has influenced the river. The river has changed. What do you think?
Fewer children.
So fewer children is one of those because we have more we can give to each of them, okay? Now, and so all of these will be important but partial. And the reason why it's partial is if you have more children and this pressure's still there, okay? But you're right. I grew up with 5 kids, and one of us could have an art experience, okay? And not 5 of us. So fewer children. What else? Both parents in the workforce. You got to structure and schedule children, and then there's more affluence because of that, and so there is more opportunity to spend on our children. Another one in the back.
I think that popular culture has really brought in that river through mass media expanding.
So the mass media.
The internet, I think that it has a way to really create an individualistic society.
So yeah, the media is purveyor of the individualistic culture, all that's available. It's very interesting, some of the kind of natural experiments that have occurred, like I think it was New Guinea, where they'd never had TV. They also had never had, as far as any anthropologist has ever seen, had eating disorder problems in girls. It was unknown in the culture. Within 2 years of the coming of TV and those images, they were beginning to get eating disorder problems. So media is a powerful influence, and it saturates our world. Yes? Yes, the portrayal of wealth. Now this is a worldwide phenomenon because kids everywhere in the world can get on the internet, they can get on TV, and they see. So without that widespread exposure, most of us, we're comparison animals, okay? We compare ourselves to a relevant group. And we feel like we are deprived or we have enough, in part depend on our peers. The peers are worldwide. The peers are the fast lane. And the media play that up. And I'm not saying that it's a conspiracy of the media, but it's out there. And so the ratcheting up so that you find out that ponies are like so last year for birthday parties. When you discover that llamas are the big thing, okay? And you find that out in the media. And then you introduce a llama to your neighborhood, and then everybody feels they have to move to the llama edge. So this woman here had, yes?
I would just say, emphasizing on those two comments, the transition from a society of producers to a society of consumers, and the idea of commodifying oneself.
Yeah, so the movement from a society of producers to consumers. And I want to pick up on that because for me, a big picture here is the invasion of the consumer culture, which is materialistic, individualistic, and competitive, into family life. For me, that embraces a number of aspects of this, so that parents, more affluent in general, seeing themselves as service providers, as opportunity providers to children who get to feel entitled to more and more. And this is inherently an insecure position to be in, because in a consumer-oriented culture of family life, it's never enough. Somebody's always doing more than you are doing. And so I believe around things like the scheduling and the out-of-control birthday parties, the proms, a lot of these things, you know, parts of the country where kids go to Cancun, New Mexico, you know, as 17-year-olds for sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's not that parents, you sit down with a parent, would you like your child to be involved in a high-risk activity in Mexico? No, but they don't want their child to be left behind the peer culture. So you don't want to spend $500 on your child's birthday party with all of the first graders, okay, all of whom are going home with goodie bags, and you have to rent a hall. Like, this is very few parents' idea of a fun time. But if that's the standard in your community, which keeps getting ratcheted up, then it's hard to resist. Now, suppose you wanted to do something radical, like not have goodie bags, party bags, $10 worth of junk that the kids go home with. They used to go home with a little piece of candy. Now they go home with, you know. So you decide one year, and I've talked to parents who did this. Hey, I'm opting out of this. So the 8-year-olds come over. You didn't outsource it and hire professional clowns. You have the party in the old way, you know, cake and ice cream, and there's some presents. There's no party bags. There's no goodie bags. So this is a family in which one little 7-year-old said, "Where's my party bag?" And the mother said, "Oh, Jason, we decided not to do those this year." And he says, quote, "What a ripoff." Meanwhile, the party girl bursts into tears. She's humiliated. So next year, you're going to not have party bags. If you're an average parent, you're going to not put your child through this. Your child's going to beg you. He's going to beg you. So it ratchets up, it ratchets up, it ratchets up. So this bigger picture then of parents anxiously trying not to fall behind. My own view, the figures now are not based on anything scientific, but my own view is about 5% of parents are driving this competitive culture of childhood. They over-identify with their children, may be very competitive anyway, it's more and bigger. And that the other 95% are trying not to be left behind. You get if you live in Wayzata, Minnesota, you get a note from the Soccer Association saying, "We noticed that your child has not yet participated in our soccer program. We thought you would like to know that if you don't get him," these are boys, "signed up soon, you can kiss off his chance of ever making the varsity." Nicely put. That's what it says. Okay? So you say, well, Maybe he's good at it. Maybe he'll like it. I don't want to foreclose an opportunity. So you step into that water. Now, I'm not against soccer. I'm not against any of these things. But you step into it anxiously. And as one mother said, when her kid was good, oh, pray for average children is what I do, okay? But there are none left. There are none left in the country. There may be one somewhere, but there are none left. They may have special needs, but they're, anyway. She said, if I knew now at age 11 that I had given away my family time, I would never have started him back there. So it's good parents who get into this sort of treadmill. So it's a consumer culture. It's a supersizing culture, right? Bigger is better. Have you seen at McDonald's, the old Coke, average Coke is now like the toddler's size Coke. Everything is supersized. As we said, increasing media influences at increasingly younger ages. They're now working on infants getting brand recognition through smell. They're hoping that as children grow up, they will identify from their precognitive levels the smell of the product that they got exposed to. And then in the midst of all this, we have what I call a combination, a kind of a toxic combination of the consumer culture and the therapeutic culture. Now, I'm a therapist. Some of my best friends are therapists. I'm not against therapy. But at a cultural level, we've gotten this message out to parents that your kids are fragile, that their self-esteem has to be boosted all the time. When we got on the Today Show, and Jenna Jacob, your faculty, was part of the Birthdays Without Pressure project, Matt Lauer actually, I'm referring to one in which who's the maven of all things fashionable? Martha Stewart was showing Matt Lauer how to have a simple birthday party for your child that was a miniature golf course. Okay? And they went around with a bunch of kids, all made from scratch. And in the background, it was just great. One of the kids was saying, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this. Oh, shut up, kid. It was live TV. I don't want to do this anymore. But anyway, they got to a trophy display. The trophies, like, I was a good debater in high school, and like we won the league, and I got the trophy for the best debater in Philadelphia, you know. These were this big. Every child was going to get a trophy for participating in the miniature golf. And then, but here's my point, because Matt Lauer said, well, you wouldn't want anybody to go home in tears. That is an expression of a cultural common sense that our children are fragile. They all must be winners at all the time. And so some parents then, going to Cancun for sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which is big in my part of the world, it was an interview with a mother whose daughter was in Cancun. She said, I'm really not comfortable about it. But she said, all of her friends at her lunch table are in Cancun. How sad would it be for Jessica to be the only one from her group not in Cancun? You have a problem with that? Part of an adult is you realize that passes. That passes. But if you're into a kind of too much psychologizing, therapeutic way of thinking about parenting, then you won't set limits. And you also then don't want your children to be mad at you. You check your poll ratings frequently with them, okay? You're afraid that they will break off communication. So let me go back to the family dinners, and then we'll take a few questions. So pull this together around family meals. The survey that I just helped to construct and we're now analyzing, National Probability Sample of Parents, 95% of them believe in everything we're talking about here in terms of family time and family meals. They absolutely rate family dinners, particularly over every other kind of family activity. There is almost no dissensus about that at the values level. But putting it on the ground involves a set of decisions that must involve values and vision and willingness to take unpopular steps with children. So these are some of my take-home messages here. It has to be at the level of values, because if we can't articulate our values to our children, we just seem like meanies in a consumer culture. You don't need a TV in your bedroom, okay? Those activities, I don't want to be driving you everywhere. No. What kind of family do we have? What are our values? And are they part of a religious value orientation? This is how we see our family life. This is how we like to do celebrations. This is why meals are very important to us in this family. Okay? That's why we're doing this. So values that are based on a vision. Now that I have the advantage of having grown-up kids, and fortunately they're doing well in life, I think we need to be thinking about parenting our children, our success. We determine our success at age when they're 25, not by how much they like us along the way. Okay? And obviously, if you're alienated from your kids, that's something different. But to be willing to set a course in a consumer culture that says we have a value-based family, a family with vision, and we're setting that course. And that might mean, my son, that you're not going to get to do that extra activity you want. And by the way, my daughter, you would rather be on the phone talking with your friends, but you're coming to dinner. And it's not going to break my heart if for the first 15 minutes you don't talk to me. It's not going to kill me, okay? And so be willing then to have values, vision, and to tolerate dissension. So I'll end this part and we'll have some more conversation with a story of a high school principal who heard me give a talk like this. And he came up and said that he and his wife had 3 teenage girls, both full-time working parents, very active girls. They were just going 100 miles an hour. His wife got serious cancer, had surgery. This was a wake-up call for the family. The parents got together and said, we have to reprioritize our lives. And they decided to begin with having regular family dinners. Whatever that meant, whatever had to happen, they were going to have those. And he said that it took 6 weeks before the daughters, the girls, settled into that. And they would do what only teenage girls can do: eye rolls, refuses to answer questions, one-word answers. It took 6 weeks to re-herd the cats. Once they had settled in, their family life was richer and deeper. And so it takes courage, it takes vision, it takes values, and it takes being part of a community that has vision and values and courage to parent wisely in a too much of everything world. So thank you for this part, and we'll take some questions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Doherty has indicated a willingness to take questions. There will be microphones in each of the 3 aisles. We would ask you to please keep your question brief. Mikkel Dalton, Heather Hinton, and Chase White, students who work in the college office, have the roving microphones to bring them to you. Who has the first question? If I could see a hand. Right here in the front on this side. So in the middle aisle, whoever has that microphone, it's coming up the aisle.
Run up like Oprah
If you'd
does.
please stand up, that will help us. And if you could give your name and the question. While you're doing that, let's get a question on this side. We got one ready to go over on this side.
My name is Ann Bigelow, and I just want to know how you relate that to blended families, where you have a culture of a child who's coming and going and coming and going, and one family may not be the same.
Yeah, so it's a great question about blended families, because there you have multiple cultures that have already been created. One of my favorite terms is the intentional family. You have to be highly intentional. And the mistake that a lot of blended families make is they think the love between the parents will win out over everything. My best quick answer about blended families, by the way, I never use the word blend, I say step because they really don't blend, okay, right? So step families is to have some family rituals that come from the old family, from one family A, family B, and then some new they create together. But they really have to work hard at it. They really have to work hard at it. And it's very difficult for a new step-parent to get into the new family if they don't have enough family time together. This happened with a dear friend of mine who lost his wife to cancer and remarried a woman who had been single, was beloved by the children. They married, and the kids' schedules were so crazy, she said the family's never together. She couldn't get in. And it was very difficult for my friend, who I love so much, to understand that. You can't get into a family unless there is family time together. So they really have to be highly focused about it.
Got a question over here. Please stand and give your, over here, please stand and give your question. While you're doing that, Heather, do we have one on this side? Yes. Great, thanks. Good, over here, please.
Hi. I was just wondering if the solution is at the value level, then wouldn't the problem be at the value level too? I mean, we seem to be ascribing like the reasons for these recent changes to be at like a consumer and a societal problem, but it seems like if the solution's at the value level, wouldn't the problem be at the value level too?
Great question. You planted these really great questions out here.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So that gives me an opportunity to say that the solution is at the individual value level and the community value level. Okay? It's the convoy as well as the individuals. There are some people who can make shifts, like that family that I described. They had the big wake-up call with the cancer, of the high school principal. But most of us need to feel we're part of a trend, a movement. And so a lot of my work has been to create groups like Family Life First, the Birthdays Without Pressure group. There's a new group of mothers who are organizing to counteract the over-sexualization of young girls. And there's a group of African-American fathers, single fathers I'm working with, who are calling themselves the Citizen Father Project. And they're starting to do outreach in their community to revive a culture of family life and responsible fatherhood. And that's at the level, that's why I do these media things. Jim, it was interesting, I was thinking, they usually don't talk about all the media stuff at academic. We usually don't even talk about it. Like none of that stuff is on my resume, My dean never sees it, okay? But in fact, it's part of my strategy for creating convoys of people who feel like I'm not alone in this. Katie Couric, just before that episode, they did this, they interviewed me afterwards, but the setup, she said to Matt Lauer and our broker, coming up next on today, overscheduled kids. And then she turned to them and says, isn't this getting crazy? And she said, I put the kibosh on traveling soccer for my kids, okay? Because we weren't having any family meals. And Al Roker and Matt Lauer started to say the same thing. My work had been done. I didn't even need to be interviewed because off script, these celebrities were they were testifying. And then a couple million people see that, a couple million people saw that video, okay? And it starts the convoy shifting. So I'm glad you asked that. It's individual values and a group and communal value. Now, the other thing I'd say, being with an LDS group, a religious group, I think I want to encourage, I always encourage our religious institutions and religious leaders to get involved at this nitty-gritty level as well as the larger moral issues of our day. And those are very important. I mean, divorce and family breakdown and violence, all of those are terrifically important. But a lot of times, if you're a religious leader, you're focusing on those things that have very broad public policy implications. And not necessarily looking at where those pressure points are, where the consumer culture is hitting the ground in the lives of parents, particularly with young children. And so I think that when religious leaders meet families, you can get the convoy shifted, and then the individual values are easier to hold on to.
Question on this side, please.
My name is Jenny Besland. I had a question. A lot of the things that you're talking about have to do with the demands that our children have, and a lot of our family things have to do with entertainment. Is there a study, or have you noticed how much we emphasize in our individual families on our families working together? Because it seems like the children might be more willing to sacrifice some of those things if they had to work for some of it with the parents as a whole, and it seems like they'd appreciate it more.
Great question about when we see our children, when we see ourselves as service providers to customer children, which is the prevailing mindset. You don't ask the customer to pick things up. We're kind of moving the display here at Target. Would you mind? You're there to please and satisfy. So chores have gone way down. And that what that is, so what I talk about is parents, children as citizens of families and communities, and not just as recipients of family and community services. Let's take the example in school. If my child doesn't do his or her homework, if I'm a typical parent to orient this to my child's personal concern and problem, you're not going to learn the material. You're not going to advance. You're not going to go to college. You have to develop these habits. That's fine. But what about the fact that my child owes the class, owes the learning community having prepared for class? Because when kids don't do the work, the teacher has to dumb it down. So what would it be like to think about children as citizens of families? They have contributions to make. So when I write about family meal rituals, from the time children are able to take a plate, a spoon, and put it on a table, carry something away from the table, the more they can participate in building and producing the family life and their communities. As part of what Lee and I were so overwhelmed by the volunteer work and opportunities among LDS youth and adults in the last couple of days as we've done our tours. It's building citizenship. It's building citizenship. And that's a term I'm using. If we only say it's good for their development to do work around the house, well, then somebody could prove that even better for their development to hire something out. They could really learn cleaning skills by a professional, okay? Or send them to cooking school, right? But it's citizenship that we're talking about, a contributor and not just a receiver. That's a countercultural message now.
Heather, did we have one over here that I missed? I think so. Please.
Jesse Lovelace, I'm a guest, but I'm curious if there's been any studies on later life with the entitled child or with like this, either with somebody that's had to participate and work for what they get.
Yeah, so thank you. It's going to take a while. We're doing an experiment with a whole generation. It's going to take a while for those studies to come along, and they're difficult to do. What I could tell you, as we say more anecdotally with stories, is that college counselors are telling me that they're running into kids who don't know how to make new friends because all their friends were in their structured activities. They don't know how to schedule, either they don't know how to schedule themselves or they don't know how to have any unstructured time. So that's a challenge that we're seeing there. And also, if parents, you've heard the term helicopter parents, okay? Kind of over. I was talking to the assistant to the president of a neighboring state's university, who said that they talk about Black Hawk parents, not just helicopter parents. And there are parents who call the president's office to complain about their kid's grade, or that Joni didn't get into the class she wanted. And I've talked to faculty. I don't know if this is happening here. I hope.
It is.
That was the president speaking. I was talking to a faculty member who they handed out the grades for the test, the previous class. This is the next class. A young woman walked up after class with her cell phone and said, "Here, my mother wants to talk to you." And then HR, then the latest is, why would it stop there? HR, human resources professionals, this was an article in the New York Times, are having to deal with parents calling in after their kid's interview saying, John didn't really present this part of his resume well, okay? Or they want to negotiate for better benefits. And the HR people are having to accommodate. So stay tuned for the studies.
We'll take one more question on this side, please.
My name's Darren Jackson, and I grew up with a family that struggled with all of these things. And in our family, one of the big motivators was college admittance. We grew up in a community where it was the constant theme of you had to be involved in these activities because the people you were competing with to get into college were doing those things.
Right.
So I guess my question is, how do we address that issue, especially in a university environment?
And that's a great one to end on because it shows the complexity of it. And that's why I have a lot of sympathy for parents struggling with these issues. We need broad-based changes and conversations. What I can tell you is that's begun at the elite universities. When I was on Talk of the Nation, the NPR show about these issues, an admissions officer from, I think it was Yale or Princeton, called and said, we're seeing kids burned out by the time they get here. We're seeing with our kids what's happened in Japan, that kids in Japan, it's overstudy, okay, with all the tutoring and everything. They get to the university, they want to have party time because they're burned out. And he also said that nobody could be as good at all these things as these kids claim they are, okay? So there has been some reevaluation going on at that level. That's what we have to count on. Also, college admissions people, high school counselors have to get together on this. A lot of it is managing parental anxiety. Breathe, okay? Your child is going to be fine. It's so hard to have balance as a parent. Our daughter with a 2- and 4-year-old, our wonderful grandchildren, has been hearing this from me forever, okay? And so she's a good bellwether for me because she's a very sane, balanced parent, as is our son-in-law. And she said to me recently, when she comes back from a parent education class, she said, even for her, it's hard not to feel guilty that she is not reading to her child every waking moment and stimulating his young brain, okay? And she knows there has to be balance, but it's hard. So we need these conversations. That's why I always do, this is the way I do my community talks. I did a little more research, and I do this so people hear from each other because this is how we start to change the convoy. That's what we have to focus on. The problem with just saying to individual parents, you have to change. Obviously, we want to encourage people to change, but then they can feel even guiltier. I should now feel guilty that I'm out of balance. And they spin down. We got into this together. We can get out of this together. I very much appreciated being with you here.
Bill, please come on.
Thank you.
Professor Doherty, as an expression of our appreciation, we present to you this clock to help you remember your time with us. Engraved on the clock are the words, Marjorie Pay Hinckley, Lecturer, 2009, William Doherty. Please join me in another round of applause for Dr. Doherty.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.